Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. Today we're making this Wakizashi and we're kind of trying to match somewhat this katana. So we're gonna have a little bit of fun playing with something new and trying something very different. Let's dive in and hopefully we don't cut ourselves. Katana, Wakizashi. Let's go have some fun. This is a katana made by Wolfpaw, and she made this for me, and I want to make a Wakizashi, which is the medium length Japanese style sword. We're gonna have a little bit of fun. So yeah, let's dive into it and make something to match this. I want my Wakizashi to be very similar to the sword made by Wolfpaw Armory. She made a really cool sword with all the little extras, but I want mine to be a little bit closer to the dimensions of the one that I have. And so I'm going to try and make a thin wooden blade that is the same dimensions as the steel blade. This is going to make it incredibly light and stupid light and very, very impractical, but I think it will make it look a little bit better, and that's kind of what I'm going for. So I'm actually going to take apart mine, and I'm going to trace out the actual blade that I have and get something that's about that. And what are we going to make it out of? Well, of course, this is wood by Wright, so everything will be made out of white oak, or at least the blade will be made out of white oak. So I have a scrap piece that is a good bit thicker than I need it to be, and I'm going to rip it down to about the right size. Because the blade curves, I'm actually going to slowly cut it in sections until it comes off. Little piece by little piece, chop down to it, and then go at it again. And end up cutting it 3 or 4 times to get down the full length of it. Next, we need to bring it down to the right thickness. This is much, much thicker than the blade should be, so we're going to smooth out one side, and then that will allow me to actually cut it down to the right thickness. So I've measured out how thick is the actual blade, went a hair larger, and then put a marking gauge all the way around it. This will allow me to come back in and resaw it, so it ends up being just a little bit over 1/4 inch at the thickest point. So we can resaw this down and give us exactly what we want. And this is something you need to be careful with. Flip the board occasionally, come at it from one side so you can always see the line you're cutting on. And then when you get down close to it, flip the board again and cut some more. That way you're always cutting on the side that you see the line on and not having to always be checking the back side of it. You're only having to look at the side you're on. It takes a little bit of practice and a little bit of time, but resawing is one of those things, once you get it down, the world is your oyster. So many things become available once you can resaw nice and straight. So now we have it down to a good bit over thickness still, but much closer. We can actually plane it down to what we want. And so now that we have one side smooth, we need to come in and smooth down the other side. And this is the point which I decided I'm actually going to make this the actual thickness of the blade. So one half of this was much larger, and the other half was right about the right thickness. So let's smooth that side down, and we are just a tiny bit over the thickness of this blade. So let's trace out the actual on this one more time, and then we can start cutting down to it. Making relief cuts, especially on the concave side, makes this very, very quick. You can come in with a cross cut or a carcass saw and cut it right down almost to the line. Then come in with a chisel and pop off all these. This is actually a really fun step. I always love doing relief cuts where you can come in with the saw down to the concave line and then come in with the chisel and remove everything back into it. And it is really surprising how close you can get to the line, how accurate and how smooth this can be with just the chisel. It's not going to be perfectly. There's going to be a little bit of waviness, so I like to keep it just a hair off the line. Then I can come in with the spoke shave and get it down to the exact shape I want. Bring this right down to the line. The spoke shave gives me that nice surface I want. After doing the inside of the blade, then we can flip it around and do the outside of the blade. Isn't it interesting how there are 2 sides to everything, and once you finish one side, you have to do the other side. And you want to make sure you're going with the grain. And you can see here I'm going one direction in one area and another direction in another area because the grain changes, or I'm actually going up one hill and down the other. So I'm going to be adjusting it. And I'll take off heavy shavings at the beginning, then I'll adjust it a little bit lighter and take off a lighter shaving. And on the very tip of this, on mine, it actually comes to an angled point, and so I want to duplicate that on here. With Wolfpaw's, hers was a rounded point, and so there's different ways of doing it. I actually haven't done enough research on the actual saws to know what is the historical method, and I'm sure, just like with a lot of other things, there are lots of different historical periods and methods of making them. But it would be a fun thing to actually do in research, especially if I ever got into metalworking. To actually get right down to the side, I want to make this just right on there. the spoke shave can't get up close to it because I'm going against the grain, and so I can use the chisel, bevel down, and get right up next to that shoulder. It's amazing what you can do when you actually get the skill to freehand a chisel. You can get a really nice clean surface. So we're going to come in and start detailing this thing and getting it down to shape. Because to the blade itself, there isn't that much to do. You get it to the right shape, and then you can start beveling it. And for all the beveling, I'm just going to do it with a spoke shave. Use a pencil marking gauge to put a line right down the middle, and then you just bring in the spoke shave and run it along until it touches the line in the middle and is back however far you want it to come back. Now, being this thin, it's very, very flexible, and I could do some of it in the vise, but some of it I actually had to clamp down to the bench and secure it. And this makes it much, much easier to work on thin stock when you have something backing it. Then we can come in with a file and smooth out any marks from that, and this edge is basically done. Now, we also want to put in a blood groove, and there's a specific name for this. What, I don't exactly know. So I'm going to make a scratch stock cutter for it. We'll put that into the scratch stock, and this will allow me to then cut that blood groove on the back edge of the blade. And so we can come in with this, and it will ride right along that edge and scratch things out. Hey, look at that. We got a blood groove. Wish I knew what that actual name was. I'm sure someone will put it in the comments. There are a bunch of different ways to make this, but with the scratch stock, it's so easy because it follows that curved edge. You really can't quite do that with your normal beading planes, but for a scratch stock, the curved edge isn't much of a problem at all. So just like that, we have a duplicate of the original, except for this one has the groove in it. And now we need to start working on everything on the other end of the blade. The blade is the easy part. There's all sorts of little things that have to go on the bottom. And so we're going to be putting on the guard. And all of these have specific Japanese names, which I probably should have learned. Maybe someday I'll get into more Japanese historical method. But right now I'm just kind of doing it by eye and experimenting and playing and trying new things. And that's really what this channel is all about. It's not about doing things the historical way. It's about having fun, trying something different, and being willing to mess up. And you never get that until you actually jump in and do it. I could spend a whole lifetime learning about it, and until I actually got down to the point of actually making it, we'd be running into other issues. So let's just have some fun and jump in and learn as we go. The guard on this is, I'm just making it a round circle. Historically, it probably would have been oval, at least most of the pictures I've seen. But in this case, I'm just going to leave it round to match what Wolf Paw Armory did. And she knows far more about this than I do. And so in a lot of these cases, I'm just going to match what she did because I'm just having fun. I'm a guy with a chunk of wood in the shop and playing with it. So we'll scribe out the circle and come in close with the chisel, and then we can come in with the rasp and file, and of course then break a piece and glue it back on. Super glue is an amazing substance. It allows you to heal a lot of wounds, and you can put all these little things on that don't have a lot of stress on them. You can glue them back on and not have to worry about it. Especially with how fast it is, you just clamp it in place, put a little bit of activator on it, and you can go back to it seconds later. And we can file this back in smooth to the surface, and you can't tell that there was ever a crack there. It's actually rather impressive how those come out. There's also a small piece that then goes on top of the guard that then fits by the very bottom of the blade. And so we're going to cut this out of walnut, and it will match we'll cut this out of maple to match the walnut, or contrast with the walnut, I guess is better. So I'm going to cut some small pieces and see which ones will fit in there. I need to make it a little bit larger than I originally thought, and we're going to plane it down to thickness. With small pieces, sometimes it's much easier to put on a piece of double-sided tape and plane it up against a stop, but you get the control, you can put it in there. Now this is a scrap of curly white oak. I have been holding on to this for 5 or 6 years, and every little piece of curly white oak I have, I hold on to. It's just an absolute beautiful wood. There's nothing like it on the earth. It has grain that is incredible. And this is a small piece that wraps around and joins the bottom of the blade to the tang that then goes into the handle. And historically, this would have been a brass piece that would actually wrap around the blade and get soldered back in place. But in this case, I'm not going to be able to bend the oak to that angle, so we're going to be putting in a bunch of little pieces. So I glued on a piece on either side, leaving it longer, and then I'm going to come back in and bevel it down, just freehand with the chisel, and this will give me a small piece that I can wedge in there. To really detail that bevel, sometimes it works out very, very well to just use a file. Put it into one of the dog holes, put the handle in my gut, and it slides in there. And just like that, we'll have a nice fill-in. And then all the hide glue will fill in the gaps and actually make it disappear really nicely. We can clamp it all down and let it sit. And there's one tiny little piece that needs to go on the back because it actually wraps around the blade and it houses underneath the back edge of the blade itself. And so I need to work with that and get it right down to place. A little bit too fat, take it down to the file, bring it back until it slides right in. While the glue is setting, we're going to go back to the guards, and these we need to create a rectangular mortise for the tang to fit into. So I'm going to set it up here with my marking gauge and lay out where they need to be, and I'm just going to mark these on the one side. I'm going to chop through from one side. Normally I try and come through from both sides, but as long as you are careful and you take it little bit by little bit and stay away from the line as long as possible, you can actually get a really good cut going through, particularly if you have a backing board to stop the cut from coming out. And so it's just a rectangular through mortise, and it's kind of fun to make. You don't have to be terribly particular about it. Just take your time with it and have a little bit of fun. Slide it on and make sure it goes to where you want it to be, and then check it again, and then check it again, and then check it again, and eventually it will fit. So let's go back here to this little detail. I want to say it's a habaki or something like that. I'm probably way off on the name. But now that all the glue has set with the high glue on there, you can file it down and you can get a really nice shape. And I love the grain on this. It's just absolutely beautiful how it came through. Especially once the boiled linseed oil hits it, it's just going to be gorgeous. I'm going to draw an outline all the way around it for the little detail that goes underneath it. And then we can cut back to that detail, and then that will sit on the guard, and we can slide both of those in place to see how it will all work out. There'll be a lot more little detail shaping on them, but we want to try and get things into place and get the right thickness, because we can't actually make the handle until the guard is in place, so we know how much space it's going to take up. So with a little bit of fiddly check-in, we can get it to close to the right shape. You can see how there's going to be a little more detail. And then we can use that to transfer the mortise onto the smaller block, onto the larger block. And this one I'm going to make just a little bit bigger than, just a little bit smaller than it needs to be, so that I can come back and file it into place. And once they all get to a nice tight fit, and they slide in there, now we know how big the handle is, because it needs to mate up against those two surfaces. But yeah, for the handle, I'm going to use something a little bit different. Now we're going to use some white oak. Yeah, okay. What else is I going to use? I have a scrap of quarter sawn white oak that has some nice little ray fleck in it. And because it's rounded, the ray fleck isn't terribly important because you'll be seeing it on all sides. But I'm going to lay the tang on there, mark around with a pencil, and then start chopping in. And you're going to come around it with a chisel and chopping close to the line, still staying a little ways away from it. And this will define the area. And then I can come in with the router plane, and this is the fun part. This is just, it is a seriously fun step. And I'm going to route in a little ways, chop in a little more, set the depth a little bit more, and go in again. And I'm going to keep going until the tang is all the way in. And I want it to be flush with the outside. I could go until it is halfway in and have the other half on the other side, but making the two of them mate is a little difficult. And I'm going to keep fitting it in there until it gets in exactly what I want. Sometimes that's going to be going back and forth and back and forth. And I want it to be a nice, tight, solid fit so it holds on. I want the handle to hold on to the tang by itself without anything else. And I want the guard in there so when it comes down, it just almost touches the bottom of the hole. Now I'm going to use mine to actually shape out the handle for this. Now the handle on a regular sword would actually be a little bit smaller. These are for decoration, and well, they're not really usable swords. And I wish I had gone with a slightly smaller handle or done the much smaller handle with the wrap on it. But I wanted to do something with the wooden handle to match what Woodpaw Armory made. And so for this, I've just generally got it close to the shape, come in with a spoke shave and get it down to about what I want. But it's a bit too thick, so we're going to come in and just plane off that extra 1/8 inch or so. Just a few passes, and we get it down to 2/3 of the thickness it needs to be, because we have 1/3 on one side, 1/3 is the thickness of the blade, and then 1/3 on the other side. So now we need to make the other side to cap it, and for that we're just going to trace off the panel that we have, cut it roughly to shape, and I'm going to leave this one roughly to shape and glue it onto the surface. But before we glue it on, we want to actually cut it down to be that other 1/3 of the handle. And so it's another one of those instances of getting to resaw.
This is one of those things you just want to get good at. You can rip down it and get a fairly nice surface. I'm going to leave the rough surface on one side and plane the mating side. So I have one side that fits onto it and is exactly what I want it to be. So I'm going to make sure the total width is, right where I want it to be. Now, because I want to work on this a little later today, I'm going to be using 5-minute epoxy. I use 5-minute epoxy anytime I'm in a rush to try and get a video out. If I have time to let it cure, I'm either going to be using a high glue or a PVA. But anytime I'm making something for video sake, and I have to get it glued and keep on going with the video, 5-minute epoxy works really, really well. If I have a little bit more time, I might spend like a 30-minute epoxy and go extravagant on it. But a bunch of hand clamps on that are great. Epoxy doesn't need a serious amount of clamping force. PVA does, but epoxy doesn't. Once that's cured, we can test it, and it slides in there and has a nice tight fit. And you can see the blade holds in really well just with the friction. So that's what we're looking for. Now we can actually shape the handle down and get it to something close to what we want. I'm going to first start by shaping that second piece we put on to match the first piece and get it close to the right shape. And then we can start rounding it over. And just with the spoke shave, you can start with a chamfer on a corner and then round it a little bit more and then round it a little bit more. This would be a good place for a draw horse or shave horse, but honestly, the bench vise works really, really well. A shave horse would be a little bit faster, but the bench vise works very well. Putting a bit of a chamfer on the bottom, and then to do the final shaping on the handle, we're going to start with a rasp, and then go on to a coarse file, and then go on a fine file. And you'll see I'm doing this body twisting to wrap around it. And then for the fine file, I'm just coming in with a sliding motion, and that actually will give you a nice clean surface. And so we'll take it step by step on each corner until it feels good at the hand, and we'll keep going back until you feel it. And that's just what it is. It's something that's supposed to go in your hand, and so when it feels good, it's done. I'm going to come in with my bow sander just to do a final pass on this. The bow sander is great for doing any shaped edges, and I like to do a light sanding. It's like a 400 grit sandpaper on there, and that will allow it to absorb the boiled linseed oil a little bit better. So at this point, it's basically done, except for we need to do a lot more details, and I'm just kind of playing with it and seeing what do I like, what don't I like, and it's incredibly light. Now, I need to put in a pin that actually holds it in place. So we're going to be drilling a hole, but anytime you're going to be putting a pin into a hole, you always drill a test drill. That's why I have all of these boards with a whole bunch of holes in them. They are holy boards. We want to make sure that the dowel we're going to use will fit into it. Now, traditionally, it would have been a bamboo dowel, or at least that's what I've been told. But what I'm going to do is actually put in a brass rod because why not? I like the look of it, and this is for me. So we're using a small piece of brass, and this is actually a 1/8 inch brass rod, and it's a little bit bigger than it needs to be. We drill the hole through the handle and then offset it ever so slightly in the tang. That will actually draw the tang in a little bit deeper, and then we can chamfer the brass rod just a bit so it pounds past it, tap it down into place, and that's what holds it in. We can come back in with a fine file and file it down smooth to the surface, and it's ready to finish. Just like for everything else, we're going to hit it with some 400, or I think this is like a 380 sand grit, and that will allow it to absorb a little bit more of the boiled linseed oil. It actually clogs the pores, and that will draw it in a little bit deeper. And then everything gets a coat of homemade boiled linseed oil. This is homemade. The store-bought stuff you probably won't want to handle with your hands, but this is just linseed oil that has been treated and polymerized a little bit faster. Oh, I love watching it soak into the oak. It just brings out so much character. It goes from this whitewash blah to something that really just shines, and very, very happy. So boiled linseed oil, let it soak up as much as it wants, and then wipe off the excess, apply some paste wax, and it's done. Anything that goes in my hand in the shop, it's my favorite finish because you can actually feel it. If you're using shellac or a varnish or something like that, you can't feel the wood. You want to have that tactile pleasure from it. And so now we can put it all back together. All the finishes on, slide the pieces together, put in the pin, and voila, we have ourselves a sword. It is a very, very pleasing moment. I really like how this came out. I could have done a lot of other things better, and there are a bunch of things I probably don't know, and I probably should learn along the way. Maybe I'll be making another one in the future and playing with what we learned, because it's one of the fun things. Get out in the shop, try something new, and have a little bit of fun.
So there you have it, Wakizashi. This is the middle of the 3 normal swords, and maybe there might be another YouTuber out there who wants to also make the tanto for the bottom. This one is actually made by a friend of the channel, Destiny. She makes all sorts of different types of swords, and she made this one for me, and I really like it. And I wanted to make a matching one, and I thought this would be kind of fun to do a full set. Maybe I'll do the tanto, maybe I'll have someone else do it, but I kind of like it. It was a fun thing to experiment with. I made mine the dimensions of a real sword, which makes it very, very delicate and very, very... yeah, I don't want to look at this one funny. Also was playing with the handle. I wish I'd made this a little bit thinner. There's a few things I wish I could have done differently. It's a good chance to experiment, try something new, and have a little bit of fun with it because there's no right or wrong reason to it. You're making a display sword for fun. You're not making the actual real thing. And if you want to get into that, well, then you've got to work with something other than wood. Also, if you would like Destiny to make one for you, she does actually make them on commission for other things as well as other types of swords. It's kind of a fun thing, and I really like what she's doing. So if you want to see that, I'll leave links to her stuff down below. I hope you like that. If you have any questions, thoughts, ideas, let me know those. Anytime you do put a comment down below, it does help the channel. Anytime you even put comment down below, thank you. That helps us. It gets us in front of more people. Anytime you hit the like, share, subscribe, it really means a lot. And if you want to take it a little bit farther, there are a bunch of names scrolling over here on the side. They are the patrons on Patreon. They are the ones who are literally keeping the lights on, paying for things like this to happen. So thank you for that. If you want to become a patron or a member here on YouTube, you can click the little join button down below. And we do have special perks for both patrons and members. It does mean a lot, and thank you for that. Until next time, have a wonderful day. Here at Wood by Wright, there is never a dull moment.